Hello, welcome to Taxpayer Alert. My name is Al Segalla. I'm president of the Calaveras County Taxpayer Association. Our guest this session is Dana Nichols, who's editor of the Calaveras Enterprise. Dana, I've known for quite a while because he's at every Board of Supervisors meeting that we are as well. And I'm so glad that he doesn't publish some of the things I say. But Dana, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Al. Glad to be here.
Tell me about a little bit of your personal background and where you live and how you spend your time.
Well, I grew up primarily in Arizona. In the 60s and 70s, it was kind of a time of giddy optimism. My parents were pretty liberal folks, but we lived in a real conservative town. A place where I went to high school is the town where Barry Goldwater declared his campaign for the presidency in 1964. It has this kind of New England-looking courthouse where we would always sing for the courthouse lighting at Christmas time every year. And so I did some very traditional things. I was a Boy Scout, went to college, and had a couple of different careers. I was a salesman for a textbook company for a while, but then I decided journalism was a happier place for me and got a master's degree in journalism at UC Berkeley. And so for the last 27, 28 years, that's what I've been doing.
I noticed you used to work for the Stockton Record, and you did a really great job for them, as you're doing for the Enterprise, though now you're the editor. And one of the things I've appreciated, and other people in our organization appreciate, is you're handling the news in an unbiased manner. You don't allow your own opinions get involved with news. You print what you see, and then people can believe what you write and make decisions about their lives based on the real news. Sometimes, I think at the national level, it's not quite that way. There's some bias in the news, and it really hurts the decision-making process. But tell me about, in journalism, what is your, did you major in journalism in school and then went into it, or?
Well, not as an undergraduate. As an undergraduate, I was actually an English major, but I was one of those true sort of humanities people who did a lot of different things. I took a hardcore economics course, history courses. One of the most fascinating was on the Communist Revolution in China, how that all happened from various perspectives. I took physics, I took calculus, so I can write, but I can learn to do other things too. I have wide interests, I guess is what I would say. So I did not major in journalism. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I'd like to be an editor. The textbook business is one way to become an editor because people edit textbooks. Right. I tried that for a while. I only made my quota about half the time. And you know, a salesman who only makes his quota about half the time is not a happy person.
He's just on the way out.
Right, so I decided, well, they liked me, but they liked me for things other than my sales ability. I was actually better at doing things like workshops on how to use, at that time it was just when things like the K-Pro computer, some of the mini, this was in the early 80s, computers had come out, so as salespeople we were learning how to do that. So I developed a little workshop to help the other sales reps learn how to use the computer. The company really liked that. So there were things I could do that they appreciated even if I was a mediocre salesman.
Well, that probably explains why your use of more better English.
More better English.
What do you think of the media bias? You know what we think about it, but what's your thoughts?
You know, it's an insidious thing, Al. I think the bigger problem isn't so much people, well, and I'm speaking mostly at the local level where I've worked. It's not so much the accuracy as the mix you get as to what content you're exposed to. So local media, well, like all media, we don't make our money from the subscriptions, we make our money from advertising. So the goal is to serve as broad an audience generally as possible at the local level. I understand that some national organizations, you can target it and still get a huge national audience. You know, you could have an entire channel just for sports, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a way to a viable business. I think the bigger issue is the mix of news that's offered, and I call it the sort of like spinach is good for you, but what you want to eat is dessert. Well, what readers tend to respond to are certain types of stories that aren't necessarily the things that are most likely to affect their lives.
Right.
Intro to Journalism course that I taught at Delta College how many years? It's a long time ago. It was almost 20 years ago, and I asked the students what stories they'd looked at in the paper that day, and there was a lurid murder. And they'd noticed the murder, but then there was also a story about the U.S. government. This was before 9/11. The U.S. government was shifting military forces out of the European bases and more into the Asian bases. Nobody read that. And I said to them, well, this could affect you and your generation. If the U.S. government believes that its interests require more military force in Asia, that could mean that some of your peers are going to die in Asian wars. And it wasn't long after that we had 9/11, and sure enough, some of their peers died in Asian wars. The human mind doesn't necessarily focus at the things that are most likely to affect us or most likely to kill us. And if newspapers did the stories on the things that were most likely to kill us, we would only be writing stories about eating vegetables and exercising. And, well, you see what I'm saying? That's the problem is, am I going to get you to read that? No. Yeah. No, but if crime is a great example. There are very important stories right now about crime.
Right.
Are those the ones that are told? Not necessarily. Realignment is a huge issue. The county governments now have much more responsibility to care for some difficult people who used to be under state parole or in state prisons. It's a big deal, and yet overall our crime rate is down. So what is the effect of a media story that reports on somebody? And I can think of cases like the Kevin Dewey case a few years ago here, where here's a guy who had an ankle monitor on. This is one of the things that they use in realignment to track people. And he goes and shoots up a neighborhood in Arnold and points a gun at a deputy and has to be shot. Well, that story is a very scary story. But in the bigger picture, does it direct our... You see what I'm saying is that everybody will read that. I think that's a bigger problem than bias, is that we'll kind of look at that fearful story, but we may lose focus on the bigger issue of, well, how is our money being spent? And the other side of the crime story, of course, is from a taxpayer perspective, is our money being spent well?
Right.
And I think that's part of the reason that voters in the last few years in California have several times voted for things to reduce the prison population, because the feeling was, I don't want to pay for it.
Well,
and then the local government suffers the consequence. So
I understand the drug war has had an effect on the prison population. One time I understand it was 85% of the prisoners were in there for drug-related crimes, not crimes against people, but for using or selling drugs, and more than any other country in the world. And it's almost like prohibition. Where do you stop doing good, and you start doing harm? And well, anyway, so. How do you think our local government is doing? Is our Republican limited government, form of government working well in Calaveras County? Another viewpoint would be, is democracy working well in Calaveras County? What do you think?
I actually think democracy is working pretty well. I think that the people who are elected here, for the most part, do represent the values and interests of their constituents to the extent they can. I think that the local government, and I would say even more so the local school districts, are very hampered by the structures that they have. That there's a lot of ways in which the existing systems and institutions limit their ability to respond to new situations. And I think it's largely through funding, but there's a lot of regulatory stuff that comes down too that makes it very difficult to have flexibility. So the new jail is built to high state standards. Is that the best way to spend all that money? And now it's half full. I think that our local democracy is strong, but I think we're in challenging times.
Well, the challenging times would take in a lot.
yeah, it does take in a lot.
It's been said that the primary purpose of government is to protect basic human rights of life, liberty, and property. The Constitution seems to be based on that concept. However, during our lifetimes, and maybe beyond our lifetimes, it seems like government's moving in a little different direction than that, where government actually takes money from some people and gives it to others, which is actually theft. And that direction doesn't seem to be correcting itself. Although we did have welfare reform under Clinton, we don't seem to be getting away from that direction and move toward levels where people voluntarily help each other. What do you think of that concept?
You know, I honestly don't worry as much about it in terms of, you know, being taxed and having it go to welfare recipients. The systems are complicated, and where the wealth ends up, I prefer to speak of wealth rather than money, because money is a system that we use to do transactions, and wealth moves around, but money is quite fluid and changes in value for reasons that the banks have a great deal of control over and that we individuals don't.
What do you think about corporate welfare?
Well, yeah, and that's the question, is where does the wealth go? Because corporate welfare can put a whole bunch of wealth under the control of entities that may not be working in the interest of Calaveras County. And you know, I think of the banking system. I guess I worry more maybe about the banking system than the welfare system, because the banking system has a whole lot more influence. I see the welfare system as largely sort of a compromise that's been reached to make sure that the groceries continue to have money spent and that the population is kept more or less pacified, would be my perception if you were to ask me. But I don't really like opinionating too much, Al, because you know, I worry about these things, but not all that much, because
right.
It seems as though the end result in large civilizations is remarkably, the trends are similar even in different types of societies. We may have a constitutional democracy as long as we can hold on to it,
right.
but you look at what happened in communist societies in Europe, and they had some of the same things where institutions got larger and more oppressive and did really bad things until they eventually broke down and something else happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, if the Russians end up having similar problems to us, that gives me pause to think. You know, they've had their feudal wars in Asia. We've had our feudal wars in Asia. Why did such different countries both go and have long, expensive wars in Asia that didn't seem to benefit them all that much?
It seems like those philosophies were involved with power and not about people having natural rights that we talked about, life, liberty, and property. But America seems to be different than perhaps the last 5,000 years, with the exception maybe of Rome and ancient Greece.
Are we different? That to me, that's the big question: is are we?
Well, the concept is different.
Different.
It's a concept that people have natural rights, and that puts government as a servant to the people.
That is a wonderful thing if we can have it happen that way. But there's lots of people seeking, and typically what happens in any civilization over time is different interests and factions get more influence over the government than others.
Right.
And it seems that a balance is necessary to keep any one faction from dominating things. And do we have that balance? You know, and how are we out of balance would be a question. I think different people would answer it differently.
That's some good points. They also, how many people are now dependent upon government?
Well,
compared to just 10 years ago.
But every time I drive on a road, every time I do many things, I mean, we have to have these large institutions.
No, I mean government checks.
Government checks is what you're meaning. Yeah. Okay. Lots of people.
Well, and since we solved the philosophical problems of the United States, now we can move on to how are our local schools doing? Is there anything you would change?
Is there anything I would change? I wish we had a great deal more local control. I think that education is now so centralized, and we do get these reform movements every few years, that there's not really the freedom at the local level to respond as flexibly as one might wish. And that comes right down to the individual child. I think there's a reason that children are gradually leaking away to homeschooling or to charter schools. Parents want the flexibility to do what's best for their particular child. And when it's done on a scale that large school districts do education on, inevitably there's some standardization. There's classrooms where there's lots of children and only one teacher or just a few teachers. All these things give me pause. I went through that system. I survived it. I managed to become a productive adult. But I have a lot of regrets about how I spent my time in school, because humans are so capable of learning so many things so quickly when given challenges and the opportunity to learn, that I wonder, why do we segregate our children for so many years in same age groups and put them through these institutions? It appears, if I was an anthropologist flying in from outer space, that this is more a way to keep the children safe and occupied while the parents are working.
Or under control.
Or under control. Because when we were more of an agrarian society, we had very high literacy rates in certain populations. And I'm not talking about slaves, but I'm talking about in agrarian populations of farmers and so forth, before there were schools, people had Bibles, they knew how to read them, there were high literacy rates, and people were writing letters. So we know that it's possible to do that without a massive public school system.
What do you think about school choice if the vouchers were privately funded? That's a trick question, I'm sorry. But
I like the idea of school choice. I like the idea of having lots of different experiments. I think that there should be the freedom for people to even try questionable things. I don't like that there's only really sort of government-sanctioned flavors in the public schools. I think there should be all kinds of flavors, you know, and that it shouldn't be say, oh, well, that's wacky, so we can't do that. Try it. I am kind of pretty much a libertarian on the education front. I would like to see lots of different things tried.
Well, we certainly agree with you on that point. Should we trust journalists? Aren't they just trying to make a buck?
They are trying to make a buck, and it's important to understand what local media entities are like, and I'm mostly speaking about local media because that's where I've worked out. I haven't worked for a large, you know, national TV network or anything like that. I don't even really watch television much. I did, you know, catch an occasional Giants game now because I live with a Giants fan, and so when the game is on, I'm going to see, you know, Bumgarner or whoever, you know, pitching. But local media, and this is part of the reason that I'm so thrilled to be working for the Enterprise in particular, this newspaper lives or dies based on the economic vitality of this community. You know, the businesses and advertisers we have. So we're intimately connected to it. I think that actually gives me more freedom to give a better product than might happen in some of the more corporate-owned environments. You know, and everyone is different. But I think that it's important to look at your particular newspaper and what they're doing and decide for yourself whether you trust them. Because the motive, like I said, is to get a lot of eyeballs, to be of service and of use. And I think that what you said at the beginning about the approach that I try to take is, I'm not here to try to tell you how to solve your problems or to convince you that I have a reasonable opinion about anything. And I think I may have said this once to you at a meeting. I know myself, I know my relatives. We are very capable of coming up with crackpot theories about all kinds of things, and that's not what you want to hear. What you want to hear is good, solid information on the events of the day that gives you material to consider.
And I noticed that there's a difference between the opinion page and the news page.
Absolutely.
News has to be honest. Opinions can be anything.
And I would hope that the opinions would be honest too. Matter of fact, I've been trying to encourage those who write for the opinion page to put some information in the columns and to make them in some ways more analytical, to support, you know, whatever their opinions are. If they say this is a good thing or that's not a good thing,
give a reference.
Give a reference. Give why a person might have come to that conclusion. But I don't know if I'm completely unbiased, because I think it's actually impossible to be breathing and alive and to be unbiased.
I agree.
You know, I'm generally in favor of a situation where I get regular meals, you know, where the Board of Supervisors doesn't miss lunch, for example. When I'm covering Board of Supervisors meetings and they skip lunch, I get cranky. And I do wonder how that affects what I write about them, because
I've never seen you cranky.
Oh, well, I'm not happy when I'm hungry, and then I come back with a belly full, and suddenly they all seem reasonable and thoughtful. It's just the way, you know, we humans are bags of chemicals. And so we have emotions, we have all these experiences. I have them, you have them. And I think that often we have these experiences first,
right.
and then we try to figure out, well, why am I having this experience? You know, is it because somebody shouted at me? Is it because I'm oppressed by the government that's taking my money away?
Right.
You know, why am I having this experience? And when we come up with these reasons, and as a journalist, I've learned to be very skeptical of these reasons.
Yeah.
I don't really completely believe anything anybody says, but I don't disbelieve it either.
Right.
And so my goal is to relay fairly,
right.
to try to understand what it is, where somebody's coming from, if I possibly can.
You did the same thing with the Stockton Record. You
Absolutely,
were known for honest reporting.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
The taxpayers do.
Well, I'm trying to characterize things fairly, but I'm, in that sense, I'm kind of on the reader's side. I'm not on any one faction side.
And readers want truth.
If you know what I'm saying. Yeah, whatever that is, we try to get to it as best we can. It's a slippery thing.
What about the major mainstream media that seems crazy to you?
You know, the thing that strikes me as craziest is all the economic news, the stuff about the banking system and the economists and what they say. It seems more like philosophy or sports or something. It's very abstract and coming up with theories about why this play or that happened, and a lot of it doesn't make any sense to me. Oh. When all this talk about the Federal Reserve and when will it raise interest rates,
yeah.
It just seems fanciful and speculative and very disconnected from what I actually hear from real business people day to day here in Calaveras County, or what I see, you know, when I see the price of gas going up and down here in Calaveras County, or what I know about real estate agents trying to sell properties,
yeah.
you know, and where the booms are, because there are pockets of this country where real estate is booming, but it's not everywhere.
Right, that's true.
You know, and there were times in my lifetime when real estate was booming almost everywhere.
It's always been up and down.
It's been up and down, but I've lived through an incredible era of prosperity. Mm-hmm. I was born, you know, I was born in 1960. The post-World War II boom was just going and going and going. We're in a different time. You know, and I'm reluctant to make predictions about it because I don't really know what's going to happen. None of us knows what's going to happen. But I just installed a couple hours ago 8 L16 batteries in a solar electric system at my parents' house.
Okay.
And those 8 batteries cost more than twice as much as the same batteries cost 5 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and so why would that be? Now, I don't know for sure, but the main component in those lead-acid batteries is lead.
Okay.
And I know that lead, like many minerals, is becoming much more expensive because it's scarcer. It's the easiest places to mine lead have been mined out, and so now they have to go to the more difficult places. They have to dig deeper and so forth. And so lead is more difficult to get. In other words, we're on the back side of the curve. We had the
right.
easy lead, and there's not a lot of things to replace it with. It's sort of like with the wires. After copper became scarce, then aluminum was used, but aluminum isn't as good.
No, it's not.
I could use aluminum wires, but it's not as good. So when I look at that, you know, that reality that it's so much more expensive to get those batteries now, and I forget what the point was, but it was something, and then I read about the economists making their goofy predictions about whether Janet Yellen's, you know, going to do whatever. It just doesn't seem connected to the reality that I'm living, Al. It seems very disconnected.
We reacted very negatively to the federal government bailing out the banks, mm-hmm. and then also not just the banks, but also automobile manufacturers, one manufacturer, and we thought that was just so wrong, based on our knowledge of economics and just our sense of right and wrong. Do you think we overreacted?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, one of the things that doesn't make sense to me is all the buying up of the bad investments that the Federal Reserve has been doing. So essentially, it's waving a wand and creating money and then creating this balance sheet that, as far as I know, there's no prospect because they're bad investments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I look at the other thing that strikes me is there's a lot of corporations sitting on cash or buying back their own shares.
Yeah.
So the number of shares is shrinking.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
That means that there's not a market of investors to buy them. That the way they're pushing up the value is by reducing the number of shares so that the remaining value is spread over fewer shares.
Okay.
That improves the share value. But all these, to me, are signals that would indicate that there's not really a strong prospect for robust economic expansion.
Would you be in favor or against auditing the Fed?
Oh, I'd be very much in favor. As a matter of fact, one of the things that troubles me is that it's not, as much as I would mistrust the government and the way the government spies on me, I don't particularly trust the Fed either. And the Fed, yes, there is that one that the government can appoint, but the rest of them are private bankers. It's not it's not an institution, and yet it can be bailed out by the government. So to me, it's kind of the worst of both worlds. You have this private institution with immense power, but then it can also make the government bail it out. So who's really in charge? I think that in some ways, the Federal Reserve in its sphere is exercising more power than the government is.
We agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think history proves it. Yeah. There's a book, I'm trying to remember the name of it. I read it. It's about the founding of the Fed, and I think it was called The Creature from Jekyll Island. Have you read that book?
No, I have not.
You've got to read that. It gives all the details of the secrecy of getting together in the secret Jekyll Islands where it was founded and put together, and then it went to Congress. Congress didn't really have a real chance to debate it. It was all done in advance. It was a secret deal, and we've never been able to reverse that. But I think after auditing the Fed, when the truth is known, the next step would be to phase it out or abolish it, because we don't need the Fed to have an economy.
That's true. There actually could be many different systems for facilitating monetary exchange.
Oh, yeah.
And some of it could be much more local, which would then actually be connected to the resources and the activity that we could do here. One of the reasons that I think Calaveras County has been stagnant, it's not because we don't have people willing to work, and it's not because we don't have resources. We've got water, we've got timber.
Right.
But the way things are set up,
well, we had timber.
Well, we had timber, but we're starved for the ability to do transactions with each other because we're starved for dollars. And that's because the system as it exists tends to drain the resources away to the more centralized institutions.
And also to government.
And to go, well, the government is a centralized institution.
Well, yeah.
and that's
True.
That's part of it. And yet government is also one of the great sources of dollars for us, because if you look at Social Security payments, it's an astonishing number for Calaveras County. It dwarfs agricultural production.
Yeah, I understand that. And I'm not sure that dependence on the federal government is such a good idea, because it allows people to cloud their judgment sometimes on who they elect. Sometimes they'll elect people that promise to get more
largesse. Right, I understand.
More free money. Tell us about Bruce Key. Is that Keyes? He's the new publisher of the Enterprise.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about him.
Well, I've been working with him for a couple months now. He bought a house here in one of the best things is he bought a house in San Andreas. That means he wants to be here.
Okay.
So he is a guy who has been a corporate vice president at New York Times Corporation, done web media for New York Times Corporation, been a publisher at the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. In other words, he's had a substantial career in the newspaper industry, and he's downshifting to live here in our community and to try to make the Calaveras Enterprise a successful operation. So I'm thrilled to be working with him. I've enjoyed it so far.
And I enjoy the Enterprise. I'm a subscriber. And one of the things I particularly enjoy is the human interest thing on the front page. It seems like the crimes are not quite as important as the human interest things.
Well, mercifully, we have fewer crimes, but we will report them.
Well, Dana, it was such a joy to have you on our program, and we're looking forward to having you again. Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you, Al.
We thank you for watching Taxpayer Alert. Please watch us next time.